the linear journey story thread. Perceptible elements include the visible sea and sky, touchable reproductions of ships' parts and voyagers' possessions, the sound of a passing storm, the smell of tobacco, and even the visitor's own tacking motion dictated by the zigzagging path. Together, these strategies constitute an immersive stage set which conceives visitors as both spectators and performers, aiming to open imaginations to the stories presented. The animated film characters self-narrate their life stories in different languages, avoiding the need for wordy captions, and the multimedia screens are framed by three-dimensional interactive settings and objects. In coordinating work, the cross-disciplinary exhibition team exercised design guidelines they call intellectual ergonomics, whose key principles are harmony, veracity, and ergonometry. Harmony aims for an accord between architecture and exhibitions, in this case hinging on the navigation theme. Harmony of scale follows a simple rule. The ideal scale is the natural scale of things. Manifested in full-scale reproduction objects, this principle asserts visitors shouldn't have to draw associations between objects, drawings or models of different scales. Harmony of message minimises problems encountered by the less tech-savvy by establishing one simple operational pattern for interactive exhibits and repeating it. Veracity usually means veracity of information. However, designers extend this notion to embrace veracity of feeling, which I interpret to mean material honesty. Compensating for simulated effects, human interface materials are what they seem. Solidly crafted ship-like materials ensure consistency between all the visitor hears, sees and touches. The final principle, ergonometry, extends universal design guidelines concerning human health, comfort and efficient interaction with equipment, particularly important in designing hands-on elements. While labelled intellectual ergonomics, notably, the principles focus on visitor experience, revealing a conviction that eliminating experiential barriers is important for lifting intellectual barriers. NMAI was a private collection before it became a museum. In 1989, almost a century after George Gustav Hay acquired its first piece, an act of US Congress transferred his legacy of 800,000 native artefacts to the Smithsonian Institution, founding a new living memorial to the Native American source communities. In meetings held over 3 to 4 years, museum staff consulted with a living client comprised of the indigenous population of the entire Western Hemisphere to establish conceptual guidelines directing the museum's design, content and operation. What emerged was a story-driven museology in reaction to the object-driven approach characterising Native Americans' past tortured relationships with museums. From the stories gathered, the native self-affirmation, "we are still here," became the museum's overriding meta-narrative. Below this, 3 sub-themes emerged. Our Peoples relates European contact history from Native American perspectives, highlighting struggles for survival. Our Universes presents indigenous knowledge, philosophy and beliefs. And Our Lives challenges stereotyping through an exploration of contemporary Native American identities. It is in NMAI's 3 core exhibitions. It is in NMAI's 3 core exhibitions that stories manifest most intensely, consummating a preparatory experience of landscape trails, live performance and cinema spaces. Compared to the navigation pavilions all-in-one spatial strategy, at NMAI each presentation occurs in its own dedicated space, insulated from other areas. To structure the vast anthology of gathered stories, museum curators and exhibition design teams together devised a multi-layered narrative system. Each exhibition space focuses on one of the 3 main themes and adopts a similar conceptual spatial configuration for organising the smaller stories. A central spine installation, curated by the museum staff, presents a unifying analysis of that exhibition's theme. Around this spine, the second layer unfolds in 8 exhibition alcoves, co-created by native communities. Inside each alcove, exhibitions reveal the final layer of individual stories. The spatial segregation of the 3 exhibitions and their further subdivision permits each area to be charged with distinct narratives and objects, drawing different audience responses. Unlike the Navigation Pavilion's linear journey, NMAI grants freedom to wander and weave around the curvilinear displays. Their circulating paths sometimes cause stories to be repeated and result in disorientation, but aim to mirror community consensus regarding the importance of circularity. Exhibit messages are predominantly first-person quotes told through a mix of written and audio-visual media, interspersed with artefacts, contemporary art, photographs, graphics and mock-ups in close-knit and unpredictable combinations. Reactions are as mixed as the interpretation techniques employed. Supporters appreciating the complex native self-portrait emerging from the collage of objects and media and taking absences of detail as an invitation to add to stories, and critics disappointed by a perceived overload of ADD generation interactives emitting vague, superficial and politically motivated messages which reduce objects to story props. Some reviews reveal difficulty in reconciling contradictions between narrative layers, observing that generalizations about native cultures subvert the individuality of community stories. One native reviewer felt the statement, "We are still here," wasn't meant for him, as he is already privy to this secret knowledge. Conclusions. The Navigation Pavilion's cultural bridge spanning the Atlantic remains incontiguous at the paper's conclusion. Each museum presents first-person narratives from one side of the Atlantic, avoiding stories from the other shore, one focusing on the historical explorers and the other the living survivors of the same colonial encounter. Nevertheless, they share a pluralistic attitude in revealing previously hidden stories of richly heterogeneous societies through multivocal exhibitions for reasons that include both democratic representation and audience experience enrichment. In designing the museum as inclusive storyteller, each team struggled to reconcile inclusive representation with inclusion's other face, equal rights of access for all. Put simply, as museums embrace more stories for wider representation, they're becoming less coherent or less intellectually accessible. The Navigation Pavilion's chosen stories were only moderately representative, including a range of local historical characters to make for a colourful journey. This freed designers to focus on providing deeper intellectual access to fewer stories. NMAI's Herculean effort to include as many stories as possible to do justice to the living communities consulted was thwarted by designers' failure to surmount the inevitably complicated intellectual accessibility task. In each project's design process, human stories took precedence over objects, providing a common thread for multidisciplinary team members, from determining the museum's main message to shaping space and to elaborating displays. The unpredictability of roles performed by team members and their varying degrees of success at meshing creative strategies suggests a need to re-evaluate the compartmentalisation typical of museum space and its production. It calls for curators, architects, artists, filmmakers, scriptwriters, graphic designers, etc., to be able to cross deeply entrenched disciplinary boundaries, synchronise imaginations and agree common principles so that their contributions may be mutually enhancing and not mutually modelling.
Thank you, Michelle.
Gracias, Michelle.
Bueno, vamos muy mal de tiempo, hemos empezado casi con 20 minutos de retraso, vamos a ir rápido. Tenéis un cuarto de hora porque yo creo que lo más interesante será luego el foro de debate. Bueno, el siguiente ponente es Rüdiger Leiner, que viene desde Alemania. Él hizo en 1977 un máster en economía.
He works for the Federal Government of Economy on international affairs. He was in charge with tourist policies. He was an expert for national tourism for the National European Commission. He is chief of the coordination unit of tourism for the European German Federation of Blind People. So when you wish, Rüdiger.
The opportunity to tell you something about the process we started in Germany to make museums and exhibitions more accessible. The starting point for this process, of course, was Article 30 of the United Nations Convention, according to which the governments promise to ensure access for persons with disabilities to cultural sites such as theaters and museums. When we speak of access, we should make very clear that we mean both, not only the physical access to the building, to the site, but also the sensoric access to the content of the exhibition, the objects and the documents or the information. That sometimes is a severe barrier in mutual understanding. The United Nations conventions and the laws only form the basis. To get these accessibility convention alive, we need a close dialogue between operators and disability organizations. In Germany, this dialogue started when the German Federation of the Blind and Partially Sighted established its coordination unit, which I'm head of. And we published a number of guidelines and recommendations concerning the accessibility of the whole life. I just want to mention two of them here. They are of importance for our discussions. In 2008, we published guidelines concerning the accessibility of museums and exhibitions that can be downloaded from our website. And in 2012, we published recommendations concerning the selection of audio guides and multimedia guides. Yesterday, I walked on the city wall of Avila using the audio guide, and I can tell you that this audio guide at least meets one of these accessibility criteria, because you don't have to press any button. The information starts automatically when you are coming close to an object and stops when you are moving away from it. The information itself could be better from the point of view of visually impaired people, because visually impaired visitors expect that you get information that compensate the lack of vision, such as the size of the object, the colors, and so on. But it was an interesting experience yesterday to use this audio guide. These criteria can also be downloaded, but we did not only publish these criteria, we discussed the drafts in public conferences with operators of museums, with developers and producers of audio guides. And this dialogue was the results of the dialogue were included in the final versions of these papers. 2 years ago, the local authorities of Berlin, charged with city development and cultural politics, established a working group to set up a list of criteria concerning the accessibility of public museums in Berlin. The initiators were the local authorities and the public museums, but members of this group, of course, were also the disability organizations in Berlin. goal of that group was to establish a tool to evaluate the accessibility of exhibitions. But the local authorities also wanted to use this tool to decide whether exhibitions shall get public subsidies to become more accessible. What were the main results? Of course, after two years, we could publish this list of criteria, and this list covers the needs of several target groups: the visitors with walking impairments and wheelchair users, visual impairments and blind visitors, hearing impairments and visitors using sign language, and also visitors with cognitive impairments. So it was it is an exhaustive list. These lists are also published, not only in German, but also in Spanish and hopefully in some weeks or months in English. When I drafted this presentation, the English translation wasn't ready yet. Besides this output, there were some interesting learning results for both sides, because the museum operators had to be convinced that one list of criteria is not sufficient, because each target group has its own accessibility needs, and specific measures have to be taken to meet these needs. And more important, they had to learn that the criteria cannot be restricted to the exhibition itself, but the accessibility of the building, or let's say the whole environment, has to be covered as well. And this second point was the most crucial point in the discussion. The reason for that were some conflicting interests in the understanding of accessibility, because when the visitor speaks of accessibility, he sees three parts. First, how to get there. That means the environment, or at least the public transportation, has to be accessible. Secondly, how to get in. That's the accessibility of the building. And how to enjoy the exhibition. That's the accessibility of the objects and the information. On the other side, the planner of an exhibition usually doesn't feel responsible for the accessibility of the building, and the operators of a museum do not feel responsible for the accessibility of the whole environment. That was a discussion that took a long time. How did we solve the problem? The solution was that accessibility issues are included in the list, but not to evaluate the exhibition itself. But the planner of an exhibition has to provide the information for the visitor concerning the accessibility of the building and the environment, so that the visitor can decide, is it useful to get there alone? Do I need assistance? Or he can take his own decisions. This process, as I already said, took 2 years. Maybe for you that's not surprising, but I remember very well that in the first meeting of that working group, the chairperson said, I welcome you. The local authorities decided to establish that group to set up a list of accessibility criteria. I think the list shouldn't have more than 3 or 4 pages, and we will have the final version in 4 or 5 months. 2 or 3 pages was true, but not for the whole list, but for each target group. That means 20 pages. And the last meeting, we published this list after a discussion of 2 years. But it was an important process, an important dialogue that increased the understanding on the side of the operators and the local authorities. And it was of importance far beyond Berlin. For last year, the Federal Association of Public Museums in Berlin took the decision to establish guidelines on the accessibility of museums concerning all their members. That means now we are already on the federal level with these guidelines. Hopefully these guidelines will be published in November of this year. And the project was started to set up a list of criteria and the labeling system for nearly all parts of tourism. NATCO, that's the National Coordination Board on Tourism for All in Germany, is partner in this project. And the goal of the objective of this project is to not only to set up a list of criteria, but also to evaluate the operators of establishments that want to use these labels. They will be evaluated by external evaluators whether they meet this criteria. To come to the end, I would. Okay. Tourism is a border-crossing event, and thus we need the harmonization of these accessibility criteria on international level, or at least European level. The ONCE conference is a good opportunity to exchange views and share experience. That's why I'm very happy that this conference takes place for the 4th time already. I thank the ONCE for organizing this conference, and I thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Gracias, Rudiger. Me gustaría decir algo que.
Thank you, Rudiger. I would like to say something that drew my attention. So, the exhibitions curators don't think about accessibility. And they don't think about the people they're making the exhibitions for. The next speaker is Manuel Jimeno. I'm going to introduce you. We are behind the schedule, so I'm not going to read your CV. So he doesn't want me to say that he comes from the banking world. Since 2004, he has been the general director of Orange Foundation. Welcome to the social economy, not to the other economy. Thank you, Merce. Thank you for inviting us to be part of this Congress. Congratulations for organizing it and for choosing Avila, such a beautiful place for the Congress to take place. Mercy and I are very good friends, and so she has allowed to call my speech one way, but I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to call my speech The Accidental Tourist. There are many kinds of tourists, as you know. The tourist carrying a map that he has received in a hotel, a map that you are not able to read. And there's the beach tourist, the occasional tourist, the local tourist, the cultural tourist. There are many kinds of tourists because we are many kinds of people. Ann Tyler published a few years ago this book that was made into a film, The Accidental Tourist, in which William Hart was a sad person. As we may remember that William Hart always does sad roles. He wrote guides for accidental tourists, business tourists that had a limited time to visit the city. The accidental tourist, we can understand by accident as occasional, but we can include some other things. We can include non-essential. A non-essential tourist means we can refer accessibility and culture in this respect. We work with auditive disability and visual disability, and I'm going to talk what we have done in this respect. I'm going to talk about auditive disability. Once we had a dream, and our dream was that these auditive disabled people could be able to travel across Spain and could be able to could have an idea of the history of art and culture in Spain. We started in 2007, and we introduced sign guides in the King Sofia Museum. Then we continued. You can see the order on the slide. And the Thyssen Museum, the Roman Art Museum of Merita in Altamira, the National Museum of Art in Catalonia, where there were 3 sign guides in Catalan Spanish. In Altamira, we did something interesting. Before there was first a sign guide, and then there was an audio guide. That was something interesting. First of all, we started to think about museums, but then we realized that it wasn't enough to make our dream true. And then we started to think about monuments. We are in Alhambra. We have a sign guide there. And we signed a convention with the National Heritage to be in 5 royal places, in the palaces. But we then realized more things. We realized that the sign guide is a device. We started with a PDA, and now it's an iPod. Sign guides have audio guides and captions. But we realized that there was more to be done. We wanted to reach more people. And we started to think about magnetic loops, amplifiers. We started with a process that finished in all state museums having one of these devices. In terms of visual disability, in the Sephardic Museum of Toledo, we installed a tactile gallery. That means that there are things you can touch. There is a mock-up of the dome, and you can see somebody up there with a hammer, so that when you touch that person, you can have an idea of the scale. The people on the light is the wall that you can touch, and you can touch other things that are part of the museum. Why in the Sephardic Museum? Because there are two kinds of reasons. Because it was something easy to do. But I'm going to tell you another one. Because it's a small museum, and we could carry out a pilot project. But it's a museum that represents a culture. They don't always exhibit works of art. They represent the culture. There are things that you can touch and you can break, and it doesn't happen anything. It's okay. Because there is a craftsman who can remake it. In 2013, we are going to be in the National Archaeological Museum that was rehabilitated. And they have done something very important in terms of accessibility. They have thought about accessibility from the very first moment, something that is very, very important because it simplifies, it makes things cheaper. I mentioned 2013, and I hope it will be in 2013, starting from September. And there will be accessibilities for different kind of disabilities. And there will be a tactile gallery that will overcome that in the Sephardic Museum. And this is a dream made true. For example, museums where there are many sculptures are museums that should be touched. When we install a tactile gallery, we want everybody to be able to touch. And although you are not a disabled or visually disabled people, you can close your eyes and touch the object. We are going to do more things. We realized, because we never start learning, because there were that you don't have to give fish as a gift. You have to teach them how to fish. And we realized that we should try to make the art world more accessible to the tourist. And we worked together with the foundation of the Prado Museum, with Association of Auditive Disabled People. We worked with children, and we wanted to teach them we wanted them to have theoretical classes. Now I'm going to talk to you about an experience we have had with the autism, and you will ask, and what does that has to do with what we are talking about? We are working with an association located in Madrid who focuses on emotional education with creativity. They work with autism. They want people to enter the museums. They want them to go to a museum where they had never been. They want them to understand what a museum contains. They want them to understand that a museum is art. They want them to know that it is not compulsory to like what you see. They wanted that, starting from art, they could understand what the creation process means. We started some workshops. By the way, if you are in Madrid on Friday, I invite you at 7 o'clock in the evening at the French Institute, where we are going to release a documentary on the experience I'm talking about, in which artists and voluntary people were involved. As you can see, we have made graffitis, even paellas. And what does that have to do with what I'm talking about? You may say I'm a bit old, and I don't know what I'm talking about. We can talk about collateral benefits. For example, the works carried out by these peoples were exhibited in an art gallery, in an exhibition made by people with autism. We are creating something that we can exhibit in an exhibition, and it can be included, if we have the courage to do it, in a tourist guide. So we are creating tourist content. We have managed to change the concept and tourism, because they realized that they were able to enter a museum. They have lost the fear. They have changed the concept of tourism, and they have been able to enter many cities. I think this influence on tourism for all. Please don't give me an applause. I know you are willing to do it for my work, for our work. But I'm going to tell you one thing that I have never told in public. I wake up at night. Sometimes I'm very nervous. I'm sweating. And I see this word, factoid. And what's that? And I wonder, what's that? I wake up and I'm very startled. I think about murderers and thrillers. I Googled the word, and I found out that it was created by the New York Times. It is something that seems real, seems a fact, could be a fact, but in reality it's not a fact. And how can I connect this with what we are doing? Will tourism for all and design for all and cultural accessibility a factoid? Will inclusion be a factoid? Somebody says yes. There are things that are available to everybody, so that we can avoid this, what I'm talking about, be a factoid. There is a report on the Information Society in Spain, and we talked about Spanish philosopher Daniel Innerarity, who says inclusion becomes a fundamental key to solve global problems. So I want to emphasize a fundamental key. We have to commit, we have to disseminate it. We don't have to be experts to be able to talk about accessibility. And it has to be a commitment. It doesn't have to be a law. It doesn't have to be obligation. We have to believe in it. if we want it to become being a factoid. So inclusion means presence, daily presence. So in the Thyssen Museum there is a temporary exhibition of Pizarro, so that I can go and see it. We have to try, we have to make everything possible so that disabled people are present in the museums. We have to make them visible. An autistic person can raise their voice and can make photos, and there is no problem if they do it in a museum. It happened the other day in Barcelona, where there is a lot of noise. These are things we have to make so that the accidental tourist become an essential tourist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you for your speech, Manuel. You had two more minutes, but I'm sure you will get many questions. Our next speaker is Mrs. Clara Mineiro. Welcome. She has a degree in history by the Lisbon University. She's working for the General Direction of Cultural Heritage. In 2003, she works for Accessible Museums, which was the International Year of People with Disabilities. It's an important fact. The first result of this project was a book, Museum and Accessibility, published by the IPM, about several temporary exhibitions working on accessibility solutions. In 2008, she coordinated a pilot project in the National Museum of the Azulejo in Lisbon. In 2011, she started her research as researchers focused in museums operators, and she's working on a strategy of accessibility in museums and cultural humanity heritage.
So good, and I think maybe more accessible for foreigners. So, Portuguese heritage moving towards accessibility, the role of the importance of networking, that's the topic of my presentation. And there will be 5 main issues in my presentation. Who are we, the Direção Geral do Património Cultural? Contradictions in this winding road to accessibility. How it all began with museums. Networking and participation in 2 case studies, and our next challenge, that is having our monuments accessible. So topic 1, who are we, the DGPC? This stands for Direção Geral do Património Cultural. We are a central organization dependent on the government with the mission to make the management of cultural heritage in our country. And under the umbrella of the DGPC, we have 44 cultural sites, museums, palaces, castles, convents, and some archaeological sites. Topic 2 is about contradictions. There are 3 main contradictions in this way to accessibility in Portuguese museums. One of them is that all our heritage sites are public property that belongs to all of us, and we support public heritage sites with our taxes. However, some places were built not to be accessible, and many people cannot access them. Castles and fortresses were made to be enemies-free. Convents and churches halfway to God, and palaces with a clear distinction between upstairs and downstairs. So these are some of our heritage sites which are not accessible. That's the first contradiction. The second contradiction is that Portuguese law is very much in favor of accessibility. We have plenty of laws recommending accessibility in cultural heritage sites. However, our laws concern essentially physical access and not intellectual access to our museums and palaces. We have space for many, many exceptions, and that's the main point. Public funding does not depend on access criteria, so it doesn't work. Third contradiction, financial constraints justify poor commitment with access, because, of course, access is very, very expensive. However, poor resources stimulate creativity. When we don't have much money, partnerships are encouraged, and we want to share resources to find solutions without spending much money. Topic 3, how this all started with museums. The year 2003 was the year of people with disabilities. We created the project Museums and Accessibility, based on partnership with several associations of people with disability, visual impairment, hearing impairment, mobility impairment, and intellectual impairment. And after this partnership, we developed work in 3 main areas. We published the book Museos del S.XXI about good practices to make museums more accessible. Can be downloaded in our site still now. Second area of work in partnership with the Disability Association was training for museum professionals within the Portuguese museum network that covers museums all over the country. And the third area of work was developing experimental exhibitions. In the first place, in temporary exhibitions in small local museums, Museu de Évora, Museu de Cerâmica in Caldas da Rainha, and in the year 2008, an experimental exhibition in a permanent exhibition in a big national museum in Lisbon, the Museu Nacional do Azulejo, which is now our national tile museum, one of the most visited museums in Lisbon. That's one of our case studies in topic 4. So, networking and participation in 2 case studies. The Museu Nacional do Azulejo, the National Museum in Lisbon, and a small museum in Batalha, dependent on a local authority of this little town, halfway between Lisbon and Coimbra. Before addressing the subject of this topic, I'm remembering that this work by Aragão, Neumann, and Sagramola, they published in 2008 this European concept of accessibility for administrations, and they found 7 very important independent success factors for inaccessibility projects. And the success factors are decision-maker commitment, coordinating and continuity, networking and participation, strategic planning, knowledge management, resources, and communicating and marketing. I'll try to find out how these 7 main success factors were developed in these 2 case studies. So the National Tile Museum, the Museu do Azulejo, is a national museum dependent on our central administration, presently the DGPC. we're based in, it's in Lisbon. It is about the history of Portuguese styles throughout the centuries. And the museum is based in a Poor Clare Nuns Monastery, a classified monument which was built between the 16th and the 19th century. What we did in this museum was an adaptation of the existing permanent exhibition of the museum. Some slides about the tiles at the National Museum. And we had for this project public funding from the EEC community, and also private funding from a private bank and a private disability association. As to collaboration, we had experts from the Instituto Politécnico de Leiria, IPL, where academics have been developing a research center called IACT, which concerns research on accessibility issues in several fields of action. And also we had collaboration from the Gulbenkian Foundation in this experience. As to participation, we also had partnerships with the disability associations, the Visual Impairment Association in Portugal, which is called ACAPU, for the blind, and with the Hearing Impairment Association, one of the several that we have in Portugal. After these partnerships, we established 2 consultative groups with people with visual impairment and hearing impairment who were guiding our work throughout all the process. So, at the National Tile Museum, how is physical access? The museum is fully accessible for people with mobility impairment and wheelchair users. We have ramps, we have furniture which is accessible for wheelchair users, we have staircases with handrails and anti-slippery stripes. We have small ramps to access exhibition rooms in doorways where we have steps. And the museum is fully accessible for people with mobility impairments. As to access for information, we have developed tactile replica for some of the main tile panels, tactile replica, and also we prepared texts with information in large print and braille about these selected objects, with information relating to the people behind the objects, not to the object and the history of art concerning the object, but related to the people behind the object displayed. Here is the tactile replica of the tile panel called the dance lesson. You can see the text in large print. Braille is printed on top of this area in acrylic, and the tactile replicas. These are our audio guides. The audio guides have to be pointed to electronic cells near the object, and this is a problem because the museum does not allow independent visits by a blind person, because it was very much discussed, this issue, but the museum is so complex with many spaces at different levels, so we decided that independent visit would not be possible, or it's very difficult. So we have to point the audio guide to the cell to activate information. This is one of our members of our consultative group, our blind friend, testing the final tactile panels, tactile replicas, and the audio guide, which goes alongside. We have video guides, and the video guides are for deaf people who use sign language, but also for hard of hearing, because it has a version for texts, the one with the T on the left. So it serves both kind of visitors. And here's a photograph of three of our members of our consultative group of deaf people testing the final version of our video guide. And when analyzing how the independent success factors developed in this project, I can see three main items that were successful: networking and participation, knowledge management and resources. But there's a very weak point, and that weak point is communicating and marketing. I have to confess that we don't have many visitors with disability in our National Tile Museum, and that's a pity. Now, Museu da Batalha. Museu da Batalha is a very small museum, local museum, dependent on the local administration of the municipality of this town, which is called Batalha. It depicts the history of the place and the people of Batalha in relation to the construction of the monastery of Batalha. Of the monastery of Batalha. It was a building that was refurbished in the 20th century, and it's an accessible museum from scratch. So it was born as an accessible venue. It had only public funding, and as to participation, it had a very strong participation of the local population, because all the objects in the collection belong to the people of the community, and associated with the objects there are personal stories that are unique oral documents in the museum, and that are a very interesting part of this museum. They had the collaboration of the Instituto Politécnico de Leiria again, because this museum is the result of an academic investigation of Professor Josélia Neves. It's a piece of her postdoc on accessible communication in museums, so it's an academic study that resulted in this experience. They had consultative groups with people with mobility, visual and hearing impairments. And as to physical access, Museu da Batalha is fully accessible for wheelchair users and people with mobility impairment, and blind people, because they have a tactile path on the floor that blind people with their cane can follow and find their way along the museum. As to access to information, they have tactile models. This, for instance, is of the monastery of Batalha. Tactile plans, like that one on the right-hand side, a tactile plan of the monastery of Batalha. They have several objects to touch. Some of them are replicas, some of them are originals. They have audio guides for all the objects in the collection, and tactile replicas of paintings with audio description as well. They have booklets in large print and braille. They have the tactile screens. You can choose the color of your tactile screen and also the size of the font. They have video guides as well, and all the videos in display are subtitled for the deaf and for the hard of hearing, and also they have a timeline on the bottom so that you can realize how much the film lasts. And so this is the Portuguese museum that has more offer for people with disabilities, this very small local museum. They call themselves the Museum for All, o Museu de Todos. And this is why the Museu da Batalha was nominated in 2012 the best Portuguese museum. It was nominated by the APOM, the Associação Portuguesa de Museologia. It was considered the best Portuguese museum last year. And just recently, in April, the European Museum of the Year Awards, one of the European Museum of the Year Awards, was granted to the Museu da Batalha. This very, very small museum received the Kenneth Hudson Award in April, last April. So how did the independent success factors work out in this case? To my view, the very strong factors was decision-maker commitment, networking and participation, and knowledge management. Decision-making commitment is a very important fact to analyze, because in Batalha, the head of the municipality took accessibility as a political banner in his area. So there are many activities developed in the town and in the area to promote accessibility, and he personally took this issue on hands, and he personally presented this case to receive these awards and managed to get them. He did this work, the president of the municipality. So political commitment is really very important. Knowledge management, of course, it's also fundamental, because this is an academic project, is the result of an academic project. So these factors are very, very important. Topic 5, next challenge. Next challenge, accessible monuments. We are developing at the DGPC a network of the Portuguese World Heritage Monasteries, which are Museu da Batalha, Mosteiro da Alcobaça, Mosteiro dos Jerónimos, and Convento de Cristo. And our challenge is having these monasteries accessible for people with disabilities. What we need as a successful independent factor is more communicating and marketing at the end of this project. That's all.
Thank you, Carla. Carla, I wanted to tell you that it's worthwhile, even if only one person uses accessibility, the accidental tourist, we want him to become a usual tourist, only if it's only one person. Thank you. And finally, we have Miguel Moreno. I'm sorry, Manuel. I have known him for much longer than you. I have had the pleasure to work with him for 11 years in the Museum for Blind People. He's also a personal friend. We have many arguments. He has a bachelor degree in psychology. He is in charge with a museum for blind people, a museum to see and touch of the ONCE Foundation. He is an expert in sculptures, mock-ups, and he'll talk about his work in this museum. So, Miguel, I give you the floor. Somebody can handle my mouse. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to the organizers. And Noelia, the mayor of Avila, Merced, Jesus, persons from the foundation. I'm proud to be here once again. A city of accessibility, which is not only beautiful for its content, but also for the way it allows us, disabled people, to move around and to see and to have an experience of it. In our own museums, we have the whole Avila. I'm going to start my intervention today focusing, first of all, on the active participation of people visiting a museum for blind people. This is something very important to us, being active and becoming a user, interacting with the exhibits. Our museum is a museum to see and touch. This is our slogan, and we are very proud to have been able to create such a museum to see and touch. The word Tiflologics has a Greek origin, and it has to do with blindness. Everything that has to do with blindness. We want a visit to a museum to be an educational factor, a right that everybody has. We want everybody to enjoy visiting a museum. We have an image of somebody visiting the Cathedral of Burgos. Accessibility has to give the opportunity to disabled people to value the museum. We want them to visit even the warehouses. We reivindicate matters related to exhibitions, and we're also working with the Prado Museum. You have the sculptures up there, and you have to take advantage of them. There are many difficulties in the exhibition, but we have to prepare an exhibition in the warehouses. You have to prepare a long table with a lot of sculptures, and we use the gel we need to use on our hands. We cannot use gloves. We need to use the bare hands. We cannot use latex gloves. We can use a gel. The replica, the mock-up world is a very attractive world. We have to try to think of solidary education. We have to think about progress. And this is the fight we have to tackle. Here's the entrance to the Museum for Blind People. Somebody welcomes the visitors. There are some audio signals that can activate the content. We should break down barriers, not only from the architectural point of view. We have to break down cognitive, sensory, perceptive barriers, and all kinds of barriers that make a visit to a museum difficult. A museum is a cultural space for everybody. The next image you can see all the corridors, the walking corridors. They are different in the different areas of the museum. As Clara told us, the tracking systems, we have made a lot of progress in this respect. The transport hubs in Madrid and in other big cities, there are all these tracking systems that help people to get where they want. For example, in the metro stations, we have always installed these tracking systems, and we have to continue to work on this. We have to work on the terraces for the wheelchairs. In the next image, you are going to see something which is very important and which we have to emphasize strongly, which is the signpostage. We have to use big printing, clear printing. It's not only for visually impaired people, it's also for elderly people, retired people who are so lucky to be able to travel and who do a wonderful job. They work as volunteers in the museums, but they have visual difficulties, visual impairments, and they have to be able to see the signs. They don't have to need to use glasses, or so we have to use macro printing, braille, and we have to think about inclination so that we can be able to use braille. In the next image, the next slide, you can see the map, the entrance to the museum. These are tactile maps. They are very important. They have braille information. Walls, windows are all signed, are all marked, and they're very important. We use technology and science of computers to carry out these plans. We use special material to carry them out, which is a very resilient material. The next slide, you can see the audio guide, which is also a flexi guide, an audio guide produced by Flexi Guide, the company we work with. We have them with buttons, but we are talking about direct accessibility. We want them to be able to activate directly without the need to press a button. The next slide, you are going to see the Tiflology room, in which we can present our tools and our technology to see and touch. And we work on active participation. There is an interesting integration between the content and the users of the museum in this room. The next slide, you can see some stimulation tools, tactile stimulation tools that can be handled within the display. These are old maps. We are presenting all the tools from the final 19th century and the 20th century. In the next slide, you can see a braille typing machine. You can see the technology used. You can see the evolution of the technology that blind people use. The mechanization is explained, and you could see it in the display. We have typing machines just for one hand, because we're talking about people that in the First or the Second World War lost one of their arms. These are machines from different countries. They come from the American Foundation also. And they explain clearly the evolution of the Braille writing system. In the next slide, you can see what we can call the jewel of the crown. This is a tactile example, an example that worthwhile emphasizing, carried out by a teacher from Alicante. Touching is important in order to explore this exhibit. We use different materials: cloth, leather, cork, metal, and it's very accessible. And we allow blind people to touch it, to explore it, to have an experience of the different materials we used. In the next slide, you can see as the way we use brailles, the braille mechanization was used, applied in mathematics, music, drawing. Music was a guiding thread for the visually disabled people, and they helped them to get together and to form an organization. They started to associate at the beginning of the 20th century, and they started to form groups that were working on different aspects of arts, music. We have music and braille. Music was reunited blind people together. So partnership between blind people has a lot to do with music. We have blind people who sing traditional Spanish music. Music is a fundamental element, and music adapted to blind people. In the next slide, you can see a walking book, as what we call a speaking book. Today, these are accessible books on CD, and they are all accessible on our website. That can be downloaded on MP3, iPhone. We offer the possibility to have an experience of the evolution of the speaking book. What you can see in the image is something that's the beginning of the speaking book, but you can see an evolution of this kind of book in the museum. It's very important to know where we come from, where we are, and we have to continue to make progress. In the next slide, we have a collection of lottery tickets that show the different stages this special lottery has been through, and the relation with the evolution of our institution. This is our leitmotif, and not only for us, but also for the ONCE Foundation. This is an important source of funding for the foundation. So, you know, when somebody who doesn't buy the lottery ticket, they won't be able to have millions. So we have to convince people to buy our lottery tickets, because we're missing a lottery ticket seller here in Avila. We have to sell lottery tickets, no matter what. And I finish with the artist room. Visually disabled people, artists. We offer our artists the opportunity to have a place where to exhibit their work. We also have photos and paintings. There are totally blind people who can take photos and who can paint. These are works of art you can enjoy in our museum to see and touch. The temporary exhibition room. We have 4 exhibitions a year. There are also 60 square meters, but we take good advantage of them. We promote our artists, and as a bridging element, we use this room as a bridging element, where also sculptures can exhibit their work, and their work can be touched. It is very important to be able to touch the works of art. And finally, on the next slide, we see the threading guide between the world of those who can see and who can have sight perception. We offer the possibility to touch World Heritage monuments, where there are a lot of mock-ups, up to 40 monuments. National, international monuments. As you can see the Tower of Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower, made in metal, where you can see, when you can appreciate all the details. You can see it's quite close to the real tower. In the next image, you can see wooden buildings, such as the Monastery of El Escorial. This is a wooden mock-up where you can perceive, you can touch the slate roof. In the next slide, we are finishing. I had a quarter of an hour, but we are behind the schedule, so it is not my fault. I have my quarter of an hour. You can see the Taj Mahal gardens, made with materials that are quite real, and there is an approach to the vegetal world. We have to talk about tactile pedagogy and three-dimensionality, which you can see in the next image. The dome of the Taj Mahal, made in marble, white or marble. It's very similar to the material used in the real monument. You can appreciate globally and all the details and its content. There are all the tactile details which you can appreciate when touching the mock-up. We have tried to use materials similar to the real materials used in the real monuments, so that we can make the experience real. So mock-ups are nice, but we wanted to create mock-ups that are very similar to the real monuments. So we finish with the first slide. This is a museum for more human and communicative future. where you can enjoy the visit without any limits. Thank you very much. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Miguel. I would like to remember the fact that the warehouses of the museum are stuffed, and these things should be made accessible to blind people. I come from the fine world, and we think about conservation, and conservation for whom, if we cannot enjoy it. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, although it's quite late, at 12 o'clock the next, I would like to thank the 5 speakers for the good practices and for their speeches. I can see someone over there. We have only 5 minutes, and we have time to have a coffee. We have a coffee break, and we start the next workshop. Good morning. I have liked a lot all the speeches, and I wanted to say that the Museum for Blind People is the best museum in the world. I have never been there so much time as I wanted, because I've always wanted to stay longer. It's a museum where I feel as citizen as everybody else. Now a question. I would like to ask a question. To me, it's not difficult, it's not incompatible to prepare a cultural area that is accessible for everybody, but so many times that something that we do for blind people is not compatible with what, for example, deaf people need. Can you explain a little bit better that all these things are not incompatible, but on the contrary, they are very compatible? We can make things accessible. I would be very grateful if you could give an explanation shortly. First of all, I would like to thank you for your appreciation, but I am aware that there is still a lot to do. The Museum for Blind People is the best museum in the world, but we can do better, even better. And I agree with you, I totally agree with you that accessibility has to be global. And what Clara said when talking about the Museum of Batalha, and in this respect we have to think from the very beginning we have to think about accessibility, and we have to adapt afterwards. But the important thing is to create a project taking into account accessibility and global accessibility for everybody. And at the same time, the accessibility doesn't have to be a barrier for those who are not disabled. They have to be able to visit these museums, I think, and this is the challenge. And I think the less the accessibility details are observed, are noticed, the better. Accessibility will be more integrated. We don't have to be big things. So the the museum has to be accessible also for people who are not disabled. Clara, please.
Sometimes conflicts, yes, there are conflicts between different needs from different people. If you have a tactile path which is quite relevant, it can be an obstacle for wheelchair users. If you have information about a painting in large print on the wall, it could be an obstacle for a regular visitor that wants to have the pleasure of seeing the artwork without this intermission? What's the word? With this intervention. So what you have to do is offer different options and find creative ways of diminishing the conflicts between the options, and offering options that people could choose with minor conflicts. But yes, there are conflicts between different needs. Yes, there are conflicts. That's my opinion.
Sí, yo quería que hablase antes Clara que yo porque iba a decir lo mismo.
I wanted that Clara talk before than me because she was going to say something similar but better about what you said about incompatibility. We have to understand that the people from the museum, the development of what do they have to do in order to fulfill different disabilities is very, very different. The ramp could be very useful for blind people. Even myself, I'm blind. I use ramps in my house. But talking about other kind of disabilities, accessibilities for monuments, for example, it is true that there is a kind of incompatibility among disabilities. This is so. It needs different investings, and we have to be aware of this. Well, as I told you, I'm sorry, I am an economist, but I learned from the very beginning in economy that economy is to allocate short resources, and that's our job to do. We have 2 more questions. Please be brief. Yes.
The City of Accessible Tourism Commission Secretary. I have a question about this modeling. So let me wait for him. Yes. I have a question about this modeling for historical heritage. Can we see some example, or is there available in Avila that we can see this modeling works for blind people? Or did someone make it for the Castle of Avila? And what is the difference of the material for the blind people? I mean, from the wood or from the marble, what does it change for them? Thank you.
Manuel, es para ti. Oops.
Siento no haberte.
I'm sorry, I haven't understood. Yeah, he's talking about the difference in the material of the models. And also if is there any Avila model in here. Well, we offer, and is that this model, and then the professionals agree with us the different materials. As I told you before, we really like that the material is a kind of noble material as wood or marble, stone, metals. And in the case of being a kind of plastics, we need them to make them appear as a kind of stone. The Avila model is in our Museum for Blinds. In here, what you will see this evening are parts of the Avila wall, just model of parts, and many some maps. Well, you will see some updating in the town hall. But I think it is very important to approach as much as possible to the original material. That's why I really love our model for the Taj Mahal, because the marble came from Akrana mines, and this is very important for us. Last question.
About incompatibility, and I suppose I'd just like to emphasize the idea that that we could actually look at compatibility. So, for example, in the Museum Tiflológico, see if it was possible also for people who don't have a visual impairment to also touch the models, and to, instead of having sort of, you know, one version for blind people and one version for, you know, people who can see, you know, if those boundaries couldn't be crossed, so that we could actually enrich experiences for everybody, thinking about all of the senses.
Okay, la última, creo que había una última.
Okay, last one, I think there was another one. My question is about the adaptation of the paintings, which are much more difficult than adapting monuments or sculptures. I don't know if Orange Foundation has any project in any museum from the government or something similar, or I mean, about this kind of adaptations, what are the best ones?
Una cosa que nos hemos planteado, perdón, que nos hemos planteado en algún momento, pero no hemos dado el paso por ahí.
We have already thought about this. Some of the exhibitors are working in this line, and we hope that we will be able to reach this point. As I told you before, resources are not enough even for us, so we have to do our best. What we saw when we tried wasn't, we were not convinced, but really about the dream I was telling before, about the dream of touching the Princess Leia of Elche. I have the same dream for touching in the future maybe Velázquez. Okay, you only have 1 minute. Okay, there is the Durero project. You can appreciate a painting that I hope that soon it will be at the Museum for Blinds. There are already 5 paintings like this at the Bilbao Museum. We are working on this line. We have held several meetings with the Prado Museum, and maybe we will have a kind of project about the Meninas from Velázquez. So Manuel, you guess very well. So please have a look to this painting of Durero. You can touch everything. You can touch everything. It is marvelous. It's a fantastic reproduction. It's a very good initiative. Please enjoy it. Well, Clara presented to us a model from the Tail Museum. Well, thank you very much, all of you. Thank you. In order to conclude, the good accessibility is the one that doesn't need to be, we don't have to talk about it when it is good enough. And this is fundamental right.